Mubilu invites all able Ugandans to act now
this is Mubilu
and
Musoke.
save the Ugandan humanity that is being slaughtered.
With the democratization of Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective. As I promised you, I was going last week. I was not on the air, but I had promised to talk about Mr. Kasozi's general theory, if I can call it that. So today, I'm going to review briefly Mr. Kasozi's book, which is in Uganda, but I will be speaking in English. Parts of it, of course, if I'm going to quote it, I'll quote it in Uganda so that I don't misinterpret it. The book is called Abaganda, Tuteekwa Okugolola Ensobi Zaffe, which briefly I think translates as we, the Baganda, should correct our mistakes. Mr. Kasozi has a theory of politics. Maybe he has never thought about his ideas as a theory, but that's my interpretation of his ideas. And his theory has three main components. It has a conspiracy theory component. It has an army solution component. And it has land component solution. And these are the three most important things. But when I look at the book he wrote, the only element I find in the book is the conspiracy theory. The army solution and the land solution are not there. But these components, however, he has eloquently expressed them in his discussions on this radio, so they are not strange to most of you, and I will be referring to them, to these three components: the conspiracy theory, the army solution, and the land tenure solution. Now, the conspiracy theory, what do we mean by that? What does Mr. Kasozi mean by, he doesn't call it, of course, a conspiracy theory himself. I do. The conspiracy theory basically says, it tries to explain the political behavior of the Africans, especially, and the third world in general, but particularly those, of course, of Uganda. Now, what does the conspiracy theory say? The conspiracy theory basically says that the colonial rulers deliberately, with intention, created a system that was designed by them for Africans, to exploit the Africans and to use them for their own purposes. And in the case of Uganda, what was this conspiracy? In the case of Uganda, of course, he uses Obote as the best example. He assumes that actually, before independence, the British deliberately groomed Obote to become the leader of Uganda. And in other words, they created Obote as a political figure to become Uganda's dictator. And Obote, of course, as you know, he was one of the most notorious dictators Uganda has ever experienced. Now, this conspiracy theory, to me, doesn't make sense because, for example, Kasozi argues that Kabaka Yeka was created, the political party Kabaka Yeka was created by the British in order to defeat the Democratic Party. In that way, then Obote would be safe politically and would become prime minister with the coalition between UPC and Kabaka Yeka. Now, I find this very strange kind of conspiracy that the British sat down and looked around and consciously made a decision to create Obote as the leader of Uganda. Now, how can one explain this? Well, it makes sense to Mr. Kasozi, but it doesn't make sense to me. First of all, you have to look at the elements of the conspiracy itself, that the British actually did do what he is saying. Now, if they had to do all this, why did they go through the two commissions of inquiry which preceded independence? The commission, the Wild Report, for example, a commission that was set up to go all around Uganda to try to get the views of the Ugandans and find out what kind of system they wanted. And in the end, also, you know, there was the relationship commission. The Relationship Commission is the one that actually produced the 1962 Constitution, which was federalist as far as Buganda was concerned, and Ankole and Toro and Bunyoro, and the semi-federal as far as Musoke was concerned, but centralized, a centralized system as far as the rest of Uganda was concerned. Now, if the British really wanted a stooge, wouldn't they choose a person who thinks more like them than one who is more radical and unlike them? And this is the case in the case of Obote. Obote was a socialist, and the British knew it. So why should they choose Obote to be the leader of Uganda and even go as far as creating Kabaka Yeka and a coalition between Kabaka Yeka and the UPC? I think here, to some extent, Mr. Kasozi is mistaken, because the coalition between Kabaka Yeka and the UPC actually did not originate from the British. One of the figures that was involved was Mrs. Chisosonkole. Mrs. Chisosonkole was a member of the Legislative Council, and he's the one, Mrs. Sosonko, of course, you know that was the wife of the Saza chief, who was the father of Mutesa's wife, the Navagereka. And she's the one who suggested that Obote should probably visit Mengo and see if they can come to an agreement between the Mengo government and UPC. This is confirmed by Mrs. Joyce Mpanga, who was at that time also involved in these activities. And also I can say that the late friend, Grace Vingira, who was my friend, was also involved, and so was the Abubakari Kacha Mayanja. Also, he was my friend. These people were involved in the creation of the coalition between UPC and Kabaka Yeka. I don't see any hand of the British forming this coalition between between Kabaka Yeka and UPC. I think this was politics. So more further to probably even discredit this idea of a conspiracy of the British creating Obote to become the leader of Uganda. Why would they, if this conspiracy is a theoretical one, it has to be applied to all the other African countries. And of course, that's exactly what Mr. Kasozi, either explicitly or by implication, is arguing. Now look, in Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, a radical socialist, why would he be created and brought to power by the British? Kwame Nkrumah was imprisoned by the British, and in fact, it became popular for the Ghanaians, those who were fighting for independence, like Kwame Nkrumah, to become, they called themselves prison graduates. In other words, being jailed, imprisoned by the colonial regime, was seen as a badge of honor. So I can't see the British conspiring to make Kwame Nkrumah a socialist, and at that time when the Cold War was at its beginning, would be the wrong step to take. Well, can that exhaust my dispute as to the existence of this conspiracy? I'll give another example. Of course, this time again in East Africa. Nyerere, another radical socialist, was the first prime minister of Tanganyika before it became Tanzania in 1964. So I don't see the British under this theory of conspiracy theory creating Nyerere to become the first leader of Tanzania. If anything, probably they would have groomed Kambona, Oscar Kambona, to become the first prime minister if they wanted a stooge. It's the same could be said about Ghana, by the way, or Fori Atta, who was more conservative and British-oriented, who could have been the preferable candidate rather than Nkrumah. Well, closer to home, Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta, the leader of Mau Mau. Now, show me how the British can conspire to make Jomo Kenyatta a man who was known as the burning spear, which is both metaphorical and actually realistic. The Kikuyus, they had an oath in which they, in fact, swore that if I misbehave or disobey Jomo Kenyatta, may this oath kill me. So you can read this into the Caulfield's report about the Mau Mau. All this is documented. So I can't see the British being participating as conspirators to create the first generation of the independence leaders of Africa. So if I'm trying to say that Mr. Kasozi's theory of the conspiracy of the British creating African leaders, especially those who the first generation after independence, I think is invalid. It does not make sense that people like Kenyatta, who gave them a headache and were actually feared, and Kenyatta was in jail, by the way, from 1953 to 1960 almost. He was in a prison in northwest Kenya. So it doesn't make sense to me that you would conspire as the British to make Jomo Kenyatta the first prime minister of Kenya. On the contrary, it was people like Jaramogi Oginga Odinga who said, we are not going to Lancaster House to the conference to negotiate with the British unless we go with the Kenyatta. So how it is contradictory. The Kenyatta was the enemy, was the man most feared by the British in Kenya. So there could be no conspiracy explanation can make sense either in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Kenya, or least of all in Ghana. So I would say that Mr. Kasozi's conspiracy theory does not make much sense. However, the conspiracy theory also continues after independence. The idea is that the British continued to cause chaos, to exploit their former colonies by using the people they left behind after independence. I've just tried to refute one of the basic component of that theory, that in fact it could not have existed given the characters who were involved. However, the theory still continues to, according to Kasozi, that what are the turmoil that followed after independence was actually partly the result of the British causing this chaos because it was in their benefit to do so. Let us go back to the history of Uganda in particular. And in this case, the 1966 coup d'etat by Milton Obote against Mutesa II, I have already given my interpretation of these of this coup of 1966, and I've pointed pointed out that this was a power struggle coup d'etat. A power struggle coup d'etat means that there is a group of people or individuals who want to grab power, and they use the army to cause a military coup d'etat and overthrow the government. And that's, I think, what happened in this particular case. It was Idi Amin, commander of the army at that time, used by Obote, who at that time thought Amin was a useful military officer. And but then after the coup, of course, things changed. The dynamics of the politics within the country, Amin and Obote, as individuals, they drifted further and further apart, and in fact became enemies. And I don't see here the hand of the British either supporting or causing the decisions that Obote made, or even worse, the coup of 1971 by Amin. Before Obote went to the Commonwealth Conference, he had ordered that Amin should explain the missing funds from the Ministry of Defense, and the Minister of Defense was Felix Onama, and so Amin was worried that he was in trouble, so he staged a coup, and he had already prepared for this coup because he had recruited more people from the Sudanic group of Western Nile to be in the army, and the proportions very clearly they shows that there were, by 1971, there were the proportion between the Langis and the Acholis in the army was far higher than it is in favor of the Sudanic group. So I can't see the British being involved in all this and playing the game of creating and making a leader for Uganda. I know that there are a lot of people who believe that the British played a big role in the 1971 coup, but for me, I still see it as a power struggle between Idi Amin and Milton Obote, rather than the British or even the Israelis, as some people have speculated. So, and again, when you come to 1979, when the Tanzanians and the Ugandans invaded Uganda to overthrow Amin, I don't see the British there as the necessarily trying to bring in Lule, although that's what Kasozi, by the way, thinks. Kasozi thinks that the British brought in Lule, and according to my own information, it was actually the Baganda in London. One of them I knew very well was Sebagereka. They went to the British government, and the foreign minister at that time was Owen, and they said that if Obote returns to Uganda, that would be disaster. And so Nyerere, although Nyerere had the intentions of restoring Obote, of course, but because of the intervention of the people in London, headed by Sebagerega, the plan was changed and the Moshi Conference was put on, not by the British to promote Lule, but by actually Nyerere to avert a crisis, because the war in Uganda would not have succeeded if the intention was to bring back Obote. So you can see the overthrow of Lule in 1979 was not a British conspiracy. It was a power, it was an interventionist coup d'etat. Interventionist coup d'etat is the one where a foreign power imposes plans for a coup and imposes their own leader to take over power. And that's what happened. Nyerere was the one, the foreign leader who was conspiring to eventually return Obote, which happened. And rather than the British trying to either bring in Lule or deposing Lule to bring in Binaisa, all this was, to some extent, Katsozi is right. The Nyerere was involved here, and there is no doubt about that. But I don't see the British as playing a crucial role in this particular case. I will pause here for a few minutes, and I'll be back to explain the conspiracy theory, which is
you are listening
formulated
to Voice of
by
Uganda
Mr.
Radio,
Kasozi,
the mouthpiece of all Ugandans, wherever they may be, to voice their problems without fear of any retribution. The Voice of Uganda Radio works with FADU, the Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda. FADU is an organization that was formed to work as a platform for all Ugandans at home and outside, to work synergistically to liberate our mother Uganda from the ruthless invaders that have sucked it dry. Therefore, FADU invites all able Ugandans to act now and save the Ugandan humanity that is being slaughtered, destroyed, and robbed by a few people unworthy to call themselves Ugandans. Many people are crying for action in Uganda as they languish in misery. FADU echoes their cries by making the loudest alarm to everyone to join FADU, not tomorrow or the next day, but today. The number to join is 408-904-7038. The email is info@fadu.org.
We call upon people from the north and south, from the east and west, and yes, from the central province of Uganda to be loyal to one another. We must preserve our loyalty to human dignity. We call upon people once again not to wait until it is too late to begin thinking about a free Uganda. We call for a new attitude. Arise, fellow citizens, arise. Let us fight for a free Uganda. Musoke must go.
Take the meanest, most restless nigger. Strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining male niggers, female niggers, and nigger infants. Tar and feather him. Tie each leg to a horse facing in opposite direction, set him on fire, and beat both horses until they tear him apart in front of the male, female, and nigger infants. Bullwhip and beat the remaining nigger males within an inch of their life. Do not kill them, but put the fear of God in them, for they can be useful for future breeding. Anybody know who Willie Lynch was? Anybody? Raise your hand. No one? He was a vicious slave owner in the West Indies. The slave masters in the colony of Virginia were having trouble controlling their slaves, so they sent for Mr. Lynch to teach them his methods. The word lynching came from his last name. His methods were very simple, but they were diabolical. Keep the slave physically strong, but psychologically weak and dependent on the slave master. Keep the body, take the mind. I and every other professor on this campus are here to help you to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind. Because obviously you have lost.
Short break. I'm back to continue democratization of Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective. As you can see, the story is about democratization, actually, of Africa, the case of Uganda in this particular case. I'm looking at Mr. Kasozi's theories, and he may not call them theories, but that's what I call them. That the conspiracy theory is a very, very crucial component in Mr. Kasozi's explanation of both the problems we have in Africa and what causes them. That the British, right from the time of independence, they created a regime of their own making and continue to manipulate the political process from London, which I highly dispute. In any case, you will see at the end in my conclusion that actually Mr. Kasozi himself has sufficient evidence to refute his own theory. But anyway, right now, what I want to emphasize are the coups in Uganda. Were these the result of the British? Were they from external sources? Or were these local political struggles? The coup, as I've explained, the coup of removing Lule was, of course, the result of Nyerere intervening to cause a coup. The elections of 1980 where clearly Mwanga was played a role and, of course, manipulated the results. In this case, on behalf of Nyerere, not the British. So the British really had nothing to do with this. This was a conspiracy not by the British, but by our neighbor Julius Kambarage Nyerere. In 1985, there was another power struggle coup. This time it was not interventionist as the ones in 79 and 1980. The coup between that overthrew Obote in 1985 was clearly, in my opinion, a power struggle between the Acholis and the Langis. And again, Mr. Kasozi's conspiracy theory here becomes even more interesting. When the coup took place, I think it was the Acholis expressing their disagreement with Obote, the way Oito Jok was handling had been handling the until she died in 1983, and then they chose Smith upon to become the commander. Now, I don't see any British hand in this process, in this coup of 1985. I see people struggling to deal with the situation at the war front, and I think the other conspiracy theory here, which I found surprising in Mr. Kasozi's book, Abaganda Sekwa Ogulora Ensovizafe, was the conspiracy, that there was a conspiracy between Mwanga and Obote to kill Oito Jok. That maybe is surprising to many of you. Obote really relied a lot on Oito Jok, and we understand that after Oito Jok died in a helicopter crash, that Obote went into a state of depression. Now, if Obote wanted Oito Jok dead, he would not have gone into a state of depression, because I think he valued Oito Jok very, very much. He was one of the most trusted people he had in the government, and that's why he made him, appointed him chairman of the Coffee Marketing Board, which Mr. Kasozi knows very well. And Mr. Kasozi quotes that Oito Jok actually stole $500 million from the Coffee Marketing Board. Now, I can't reconcile that with Obote being against the Oito Jok. In fact, I think he was his right-hand man. So this conspiracy doesn't seem to me to make sense. It may make sense to some of you, but to me it doesn't make sense that Oito Jok was killed by Obote himself. I think he had a lot to lose. In fact, Obote was overthrown because Oito Jok was dead. Had he not been dead, probably the coup of 1985 would not have taken place. Anyway, that remains, of course, a matter of speculation, since nobody can reconstruct history and get a different result. What happened did happen. The other component of conspiracy, again, pointed out by Mr. Kasozi, is that the British and the Americans printed the counterfeit dollars and gave it to Tanzanians to pay off the war with Amin. I mean, well, the British and the Americans have a democratic systems. It is very unlikely that they can authorize their own government to print counterfeit dollars for the purpose of paying off a foreign agent or whatever. In fact, for two reasons. Counterfeit money devalues the real money. So no economist, the chairman of the Reserve Board, who is in charge of printing money, could not authorize such an action. And in fact, if he did, it would be criminal, and he could be charged or impeached. So in a democratic system, such an activity is inconceivable because of the principle of accountability. So there are two explanations here from the economic theory point of view, you don't want to devalue your own money by printing counterfeit money and put it in circulation. The second, of course, is that in a democratic system, the authorization to print money has to be official, and there are channels through which this is done in a democratic system. So it's not like Idi Amin or Mobutu ordering his people, say, print, or Mugabe, ordering his officers to print money as much as he wants them to do. But this doesn't happen in a democratic system. So I have my doubt about that. The other element in the conspiracy theory this time is the relationship between Museveni and Obote. Museveni and Obote never liked each other, and that's why Museveni formed the Fronasa, so that he would not be he would not be within UPC, operate within the UPC framework. So, but otherwise, Mr. Kasozi thinks that Museveni was being given orders directly to go into Uganda, for example, and perform all sorts of crazy things. That Obote, that Obote was instructing Museveni to go into Uganda to infiltrate Uganda and cause chaos in Uganda. It is true that Museveni did infiltrate Uganda during that time, but I don't think he did it on the orders of Obote. He had his own interests, I think, which were more paramount than the orders from from Obote himself. So the very fact that these two guys really hated each other, I think, to me, explains why they didn't want to work together. And after all, they were both also very ambitious fellows. Museveni knew if he worked within UPC framework, he would be restricted not to do certain things, and so on and so on. Moreover, Fronasa was almost a dead organization in Tanzania, and we read this from Museveni's wife herself, My Life's Journey. In her life's journey, at one point, the Janet Museveni points out that at one time, when Nyerere cut off funding to Museveni, and they had to rely on themselves, the organization Fronasa almost died. It had no support, it had no resources, and as a result, in fact, that's why Museveni tried to get a job in Moshi. Moshi, not Arusha. So I see there a little bit of contradiction. But in any case, whatever the case is, whoever has the stronger argument may present it, and the people can judge which one makes more sense than the other. So that goes as far as the conspiracy theory, we may come back to it again, but the other component of Mr. Kasozi's theory, the other component, of course, is the army. And he believes very fervently that every ethnic group should have an army, and that's the only way to prevent dictatorship from taking place. I don't know whether he's just suggesting this just for Uganda or for every country. Well, this particular part of his theory, however, is not articulated at all in his book, Abaganda Tutekwa Okugorora Ensobi Zaffe. I tried to read that book over and over, looking for this theory of the army, that every ethnic group should possess an army to prevent dictatorship. By the way, he does, Mr. Kasozi does point out correctly some of the problems of dictatorship, but they are not at all related to the absence of ethnic armies. Let me point out one thing before I forget. The army is a state institution. I don't know whether Mr. Kasozi is aware of the state of a political evolution in Uganda in the late 1880s in Uganda. I think Kasozi seems to assume that all the ethnic groups had armies. An army is always a state instrument. It does not exist where there is no state, in other words. Before colonial rule, there were only 4 states in Uganda. There was, of course, Buganda, there was Ankole, there was Toro, and there was Bunyoro. Those were states. Busoga was on the evolutionary process to become one, but it wasn't. And as you can see, they don't even have a good principle for succession of Kyabazinga. It's always chaotic because they didn't have a state, they didn't have an established institution. So they didn't have an army as such. They could gather a few people to fight when they invaded, but they didn't have an army in the sense of having a state that controls that army. So when Kasozi says that we should go back to the pre-colonial era, he does not fully understand what kind of what existed at the pre-colonial Uganda was. There was no state in Bukedi. There was no state in Kigezi. There was no state in Acholi or Lango. There was no state in Bugishu. There were societies there, but no state. The state by state here, I mean the existence of a permanent territory which is under one administration and has an army. So when you talk about going back to pre-colonial and that all these societies should have their own army, that misconceives the state of political development at that stage. Some of these communities did not exist as states, so they really didn't have an army as such. The army was created by the colonial regime, and in fact, as you know, the colonial regime exported the Baganda as chiefs in all these other areas, and it also established these state structures like Masaza, Gomborora, and Mituba, and Mihuka, and all that. That's what a state is, a system of administration. These did not exist in other parts of Uganda. So when Kasozi says we should go back to pre-colonial, he should understand that when we go back to pre-colonial, you are going back to the Bukedi, the Acholi, the Langi, the Kalamayong, without a state, without an army, in other words, as an instrument. These were created by the colonial regime. So that is very, very important. When you talk about the army, you have to have a theory of the state, because an army is an instrumentality of the state. It's part of the administration of a state, and this is where the problem arises. When Kasozi says that every Gwanga, every ethnic group, every Gwanga should have its own army, that means that that you are going to have several armies all over the place. I don't know on what basis, though, you are going to have these armies, because if you have a state, there can only be one army in a state. If it is one state, you have one army. If you are going to have, that's a theory I think Kasozi has to elaborate on, and I think he will have a good opportunity to do that, to tell us how you can have 17 commanders in chief in one country. For example, you have an Acholi army, you have the Nyankore army, you have a Rugubara army, and these are commanded by their own local leadership, and yet there is one word which is missing from Mr. Kasozi's vocabulary, and this is the word federalism. I haven't heard him use that word. I don't know whether it is deliberate or it is, he just happens to overlook that concept, because that gives you a new type of state. Federal system is a form of state where different units, or called the states or provinces, have their own separate administrations. However, they have to share foreign policy, and they have to share one national army. So that probably needs a little bit of explanation from Mr. Kasozi. And when you talk about every ethnic group possessing an army, which means that it has its own commander-in-chief. Now, that forces me, that requires me to go back to the beginning of these conversations, the theory, the four theories which I outlined at the beginning. I think I recapture the essential elements of these theories. Of course, the the first theory was the capital theory written by Karl Marx, which was it presumed certain things and the causation of political conflict. Under the capital theory, it was assumed that societies are always divided. Of course, we are now talking about a state. Societies where a state exists, that they are divided into classes, and the classes are antagonistic to each other, and they are in a conflict, and as a result, there is a struggle, conflict. Political conflict, in other words, is caused by the existence of the classes. Incidentally, that theory also was used by political scientists in the 60s to explain military coup d'etats, like Idi Amin's coup d'etat in Uganda. People like Mazurui, they said the coup d'etat in Uganda was a class conflict, that the army was conflicting with the political elite, and the assumption, of course, which was erroneous, was that the army was acting as a class. Of course, it was not acting as a class. In fact, it was acting more as an ethnic entity than as a class. And so you can see here, Mr. Kasozi, what is missing is the causation of conflict. What causes conflict? According to the capital theory, the political conflicts are caused by class conflict. And those of you who want even to understand this theory better in the context of Uganda should read the Mahamudu Mamudani's book, which was part of his thesis at Harvard. It's called Class Formation in Uganda. I believe that Mamudani has probably himself given up that theory. It was based on a Marxist interpretation of society and class conflict. And I think he was analyzing Uganda in terms of the bourgeois, the Asians, as the people who constituted the bourgeois class, and then the peasants as the people who were toiling to produce the products like coffee and cotton and so on. And there they explained the class conflict. But anyway, we can leave that to that. The other theory, of course, was the culture theory by Max Weber. Max Weber, according to him, everything depended on culture. Culture animated everything, and the Western culture in particular was responsible for democracy. That democracy was the result of specific conditions in the West, and therefore, and this depended, of course, that theory, we went through it, we analyzed it, and we found it invalid, just as the capital theory, which has been debunked and repudiated by history by the collapse of the Soviet Union. The culture theory is still a little bit alive, but it needs artificial resuscitation to keep it going. Because when we see the process of democratization, it's not driven by culture. It is driven by a desire for freedom. And in fact, I'm glad that Mr. Kasozi realizes that the problems of Uganda from 1962 were caused partly by the absence of freedom, of justice, and the abuse of the armed forces being used to kill people instead of protecting people. So the other theory, of course, was Durkheim's theory, the labor theory. The labor theory, of course, articulated a different type of causal process. In other words, it was argued that this was written by, of course, by Emily Durkheim, that the division of labor, just the division of labor, causes certain processes to occur in a society, and as a result, the more you divide labor, the division of labor, in other words, the more the economic activities increase and the division of labor progresses, democratization almost takes place automatically. Of course, that's wrong. The colonialists used this theory very effectively, and apartheid was built partly on the interpretation of this theory of letting each ethnic group and race to be by itself, and the division of labor. The white people, say in South Africa, were in industries. The poor black people were servants of the white people, and so on. For them, that was a division of labor, and also a way of preserving and protecting cultural elements. But of course, that too was an invalid theory. The last one, the contract theory, seems closer to Mr. Kasozi's thesis than anything else. The contract theory, of course, was the theory that postulated that society or the state was the result of a contract between different groups to come together, and usually the theory, contract theory, projects the Constitution as the basis of the social contract on which society is kept together. Well, when it comes to Mr. Kasozi's theory, although this is the closest you can go, because he's talking about each ethnic group cooperating with another on the basis of its own terms. In other words, is assuming that there will be some form of social contract between the ethnic groups, each ethnic group having its own army and negotiating and exchanging goods and services with other groups on the basis of that social contract. Well, the social contract theory, of course, was theoretical, and hypothetical is a better word. It was hypothetical because in a real society, you cannot assume that each group is going to relate to another on the basis of a contract, of negotiated relationships between groups with the groups with an army, and so on and so on. So after recapturing these theories, I don't know whether they are useful to help us understand Mr. Kasozi's theory. As I said, the social contract theory is the closest one can come to try to articulate Mr. Kasozi's concept that every community, every ethnic group must have its own army, and its dealings with the other ethnic groups will be based on their some form of agreement. Well, as I pointed out, Mr. Kasozi hardly uses the word federal, although he occasionally refers to the 1962 Constitution, which was semi-federal, not completely federal, because the other only a few of the four of the units within Uganda had a federal relationship with the central government, and the rest had a unitary relationship with this federal government. So where do we go from here with the Mr. Kasozi's army? I mean, the concept of the army. What is amazing, probably I should not be surprised, is that Mr. Kasozi actually says the problems from 1962, these problems we've had in Uganda since 1960 were the result, one, that the leaders did not believe in democracy. So there was no the right to vote, and the akalulu, okuba akalulu akali free and fair never took place. And also Mr. Kasozi makes it clear that the army was misused. I don't know whether by giving an ethnic group an army that would be the solution, but if the concept of the state has to be dealt with, you cannot have one state but several armies and commanders-in-chief in one state. And he also points out that one of the problems was the looting by the leaders, the looting of the treasury, which is true, and everybody knows that, and understands it, and condemns it, of course. And of course, he also points out that these leaders from 1962, they denied the people freedom, which is true, and of course, and they killed the people who opposed them, which was bad, and so he also has a summary of ebyonona Abaganda. He has three items ku ebyonona Abaganda. One, okwagala ennyo ebitiibwa. Two, okwagala nnyo obulamu obulungi ate nga bwangu. Ekyokusatu, okwagala nnyo okufuna. Now, these are the causes of the problem he's pointing out. He has not yet. I don't see how those are related to having an army. Will the army then try to prevent abantu nebajjamu okulowooza okwagala ennyo ebitiibwa? The army will not affect that. Okwagala ennyo obulamu obulungi oba obwangu, I don't think that will be, the existence of the army will affect these attitudes. These are attitudes within the people. Okwagala ennyo okufuna, and I don't think the army has any relevance to prevent this from happening. And so I think we are yet to find a solution. Now, I'm going to have a short break. I'll come back to conclude this conversation, and of course, we will also deal with the third element, a taka. Thank you very much.
This song is a dedication to all the Ugandans, wherever you may be, inside of the walls of Uganda or in the community of exile. Like unwanted children from the country that gave you birth, living amongst the free world. Rise up, my fellow Ugandans, as we fight against the dictatorship of the oppression of Musoke, for the rights of teachers, for the rights of government, for the rights of the justice system, trying to fight for the rights and the belief of the Ugandan people. Musoke has made a promise to Parliament of 150 million shillings to right the wrongs and to help them to make their lives whole again. Buying votes, buying the rights to rule the people for another 5 years in a dictatorship that has just destroyed Uganda to almost an unrecognizable state. What about the promises to the rest of the people that he's made? When will he make true on those things? Or do they not matter because they don't have a vote to keep him into office? I tell you, my fellow Ugandans, there's nothing free and fair about the election that's coming up when a sitting president can offer these type of monies and funds to a group of people to make sure that he holds his powerful position. Members of Parliament, it can happen to you. The same promises he made to the teachers who have gone without salary, some of them for 2 months. The same promises that he's made to other leaders and others who've tried to rule and stand up against him, only to fall by the hands of death, by torture, by house arrest, by whatever means he feels the need needs to be to keep them in control. We live in a time, my fellow Ugandans, where one man, one family, and one group feels the need to speak for all. Where land grabbing has gone on so much that they own pretty much all of the country. Which daily they sell pieces of the country off to the highest bidder to continue to keep money in this man's hand, to fund his wars, to fund his battles, to bribe the community, to keep himself in power in whatever way he can, leaving the Ugandan people with such a debt that they will wake up one day and Uganda will no longer belong to the people, but will be bought and sold off in bits and pieces to the highest bidder, wherever the money, wherever the funds need to come to keep this man in power. For the truth and the justice, for the helpless, we stand and we fight on behalf of the Ugandan people to bring back wholeness and completeness back to the Ugandan people. This is not a battle of arms, but a battle of spirit, a battle of souls and of the mind of the people of Uganda. The public management bill was put in place to keep us quiet. We must rise, we must stand together, we must find strength in one another to move forward on behalf of our beloved Uganda. It is a country that our fathers, our grandfathers, our mothers and our grandmothers fought and worked the land to make it a place in which we could live and have a life and take care of our families. Too many Ugandans are living in exile, in communities out in the free world, like unwanted children from the country that gave them birth. It's time for us to stand hand in hand and enter back into the country and take it back to make it great for all Ugandans, especially the youth of the country, who have an 80% unemployment rate. Time and time again, companies have tried to go into Uganda to work with the Ugandan government, but corruption has fallen at the hands of the Ugandan people time and time again. It takes from the mouth of the hungry. There is no medicine. The hospitals are falling apart. The roads are undrivable. The country has become unrecognizable at the hands of one man
who sells the country off piece by piece, bit by bit to the highest bidder, to continue to bid his war, to continue to fund the people who will vote him in and keep him in a position of power over all. The day has come, my fellow Ugandans. We must stand up, we must unite, we must become one.
I'm back after a short break to conclude our conversation and a brief review of abaganda tuteekwa okugolola ensobi zaffe, whereby Kasozi Mukasa. Okay, now the two elements I've already discussed, the conspiracy theory and the army solution. Now, Mr. Kasozi also has another component to his theory, which is the land ownership. If I understand him very well, he believes that land should be collectively owned by the group, by the Baganda, Takalya Baganda, Takalya Banyolo, Takalya Bacholi, Takalya Bagwere. And as a result, I think the argument here is that probably the army, when you have an army, the primary function of the army will be to protect the land, the Baganda. Well, that may sound very very sweet and very impressive. The problem is that we are dealing with a modern economy, and a modern economy has become modernized by certain forces, and these forces are inevitable. They are not forces you select and you say, I will have them here. The reason why the Soviet Union collapsed was partly because of the theory it was based on. The theory was invalid, and as a result, politically it denied people their rights, right to freedom or freedom did not exist under the communist system, and the property was owned collectively, supposedly, because that would do the theory, capital theory. The assumption was, if you have private ownership of property, then you are going to cause a political conflict. Well, the theory, of course, is now history. The only question is how Mr. Kasozi's concept of land ownership by Evika, for example, in Uganda or Buganda, that the Bika etakalya Bika, remember and so on and so on. Well, the problem here is, as I said, the economy, the modern economy has been the product of certain forces, and some of these forces include the ownership of property. Now, property comes in many forms. It's not only in land. It can come in the form of a right of copyright to a book, like Mr. Kasozi's book, Abaganda tuteekwa okugolola ensobi zaffe. That is ownership. It's property. Property is not ideas can also be owned. They are very, very important in a modern economy. And the they are appropriated according to certain rules. The question is, if you have a taka mu Buganda nti lino lyaba mamba liri lyaba nsenene, how is that going to be utilized efficiently within the economic system? That question has to be answered by Mr. Kasozi. I hope he will give us the answer to that, because it is very, very important. The efficiency of the economy really runs on the ownership of individual ownership of property, and property comes in many forms. Land is just one part of it. So the idea that the taka should belong to, well, there is also here something Mr. Kasozi should clarify. That is, when he talks of the taka lya Acholi, well, when you go to Acholi, how are they going to own that land? Is it collectively for all Acholis, or is it going to be owned by, as in Buganda, as Mr. Kasozi wants to say, by clans? And the clans are not equal in size. How are you going to say the Mamba clan is very big as compared to Musu clan? Now, are you going to divide Buganda into clan land, that this belongs to Musu, this belongs to Mamba, and then how are the people going to own the titles? Is this title going to be collective or individual? The type of economy we live in dictates, the laws of economics have already dictated that the most efficient way to own property is through individual ownership. And so that, I think that Mr. Kasozi has a big job here to perform, to tell us how this land is going to be owned by the different groups. Is the taka mu Buganda going to be taka lya Baganda as opposed to taka lya Bika, or if we go back to pre-colonial time and we take that as the starting point, then before the 1900 agreement came into effect, then you are going to say, well, this is the land for this clan, that for that clan. How are you going to run a modern economy where land is owned collectively by groups of clans? And that's one issue. The other issue is one of justice. How are you going to allocate land between the different clans? How are you? What formula are you going to use to be fair to distribute this land? It's easier to pronounce a theory. It's very difficult sometimes to implement a theory. So that Mr. Kasozi may have to help us there to give us how the people are going. And the other thing, the third point is, what do you do with the private ownership of land now that exists? Are you going to expropriate those land, people, individuals own land, say in Uganda, are you going to say, well, those individuals are going to forfeit it? How are you going to handle that one? How are you going to reverse the process to pre-colonial? Because I think what Mr. Kasozi's emphasis is always about is that all these problems were created by the colonial regime when it came in. And had it not come in, probably things would be sweet and nice and perfect. I doubt it, because social change is inevitable. You have to deal with the situation as it is. The other element is the political. The political is, for example, we cannot assume that all the problems we see here are the result of either the not having an army or having a bad army or whatever. But you have to look at justice at the same time. History here has a lot to teach us. The problem I find with Mr. Kasozi's theory is that it does not take into account the history and the causation of conflict. He seems to assume that conflicts are caused because of the people don't possess an army. The ethnic, like the Baganda, don't have an army. That's why we have problems in Uganda. I don't think so, because when you look at history, you find that Uganda was a democratic system. The traditional system was democratic because it was based on a principle of equality. All clans were equal, and the people were equal because the clans are equal. And their representation in the system was equal. And so you see the Baganda had a very wonderful system of the monarchy was structured on certain principles. For example, the Kabaka, one of the constitutional principles of Uganda is that the Kabaka does not belong to his father's clan, but to his mother's clan. And whoever invented that was a genius, political genius, because it prevented the creation of inequality and one clan monopolizing the throne, like what happened in Ankole, in Rwanda, and Burundi. And today, nobody, not even Kagame, can open his mouth and say, let the kingdom be restored. He can't do that because it was based on a principle that promoted inequality. The Hutus were slaves. Actually, the word Hutu means servant. And the Tutsis were the masters. They were superior. They were regarded as very smart people. And this is affecting our politics today, even adversely so, I must point out. So the Baganda system, by making Kabaka belong to his mother's clan, made sure that all clans are equal and all clans can be sit on the throne, on the Namulondo. And as a result, the Baganda, when they said Basachimu, it was because of this constitutional principle that somebody geniusly. By the way, according to history, the state of Buganda came into existence at the time the legendary figure Chintu created, merged the administration with the clan system. And that's when the state of Buganda was created in about 1300, around 1330. So that created the state, a state where the administration was based on Masaza, Magambolola, Miruka, and so on. And the clans became a separate system, but part of the administration, and that created the state, the original state of Uganda. So you can see here that when we talk about history, it is not that we wanted to escape responsibility, but in fact to make sure that people understand what we are talking about. In this particular case, the creation of the state of Uganda, that is the administration structure and the clan structure existing side by side, created the state of Buganda. And of course the army was part of that, and Kabaka was the head of both the administration and the clan system. So when we are talking about the justice, conflict is important. What causes conflict? This is what I was trying to explain. What causes conflict in society? Causation of conflict is inequality. Whether you look at the United States during the desegregation time, the African Americans were discriminated against. They did not fight to secede or even to possess an army, but they fought for equality. In South Africa also, the black people did not fight to secede or to become independent, but to be equal, to be treated equally. In Buganda, that was what saved us from the problems the Rwandese, the Banyankolis, and the Barundi had, and to some extent Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Empire also had some basic elements of discrimination. I think that makes my point clear. You can talk about having an army, but unless you are creating a fair equality, justice, the existence of the army is not going to solve the problems. In fact, it may create problems. So you need to understand that how are political conflicts caused. In other, the element that is missing from Kassozi's theory is the causation of conflict. What causes these conflicts, and what you may propose that people may every ethnic group should have an army, but unless you resolve the causes of these conflicts, like discrimination, the possession of an army is not going to make a difference. Let me give you an example. Baganda. You can have a Baganda army, but if the Baganda army in Buganda, if you discriminate between the Muslims and the Catholics or the Protestants, it won't make any difference. It can still be a Baganda army, but as long as there is that discrimination, the fact that it is a Baganda army is meaningless, because there is an injustice or discrimination. So that until you resolve that, you haven't solved anything by saying we must have an army. Well, you can have your army, but you better understand also the causation of the conflict. What causes that particular conflict you are trying to deal with? And so I urge Mr. Kasozi to look at that particular issue as one of the most important things. It is the justice within the system. As long as there is inequality, there is discrimination. It doesn't matter whether the Achoris have their own army, or the Nyankole have their own army, or the Langis have their own army. Without justice, conflict will flare up, and war will always be, will consume the lives. What we've gone through, and Mr. Katsozia, by the way, gives us very many details, especially what happened in Luwero. The problem is not that there was no Baganda army; it was the injustice, the way the way the war was fought was based on fraud and injustice and inequality. But so let me now, before time runs out, point out a few important things from Mr. Kasozi's book. The book is called Abaganda Tutekwa Okugolola Ensobi Zaffe. Well, ensobi ziriwa Kasozi is talking about. Well, if you read the book, especially page 58, you will find some of these. Let me read them for some of you who are not aware, who don't have the book. 1. Okukomya etima emyoyo emibi n'obunyomi eri Baganda bannaffe nga tuwagira abantu ab'amawanga amalala mwe tutafumye kalungi konna. Ekyokubiri, tusaanye okukomya okukulembeza ekyokufuna mu buli kintu kyonna, ng'ate w'otunuulira ennyo ky'oba ofunye mu kulya mu ggwanga lyo olukwe, bajjajjaabo lye baalwanirira okulikuuma, naawe n'olisanga nga mu butuufu ddala toliraba. Ekyokusatu, tusaanye okukomeza ddala omuze okuwolerezanga mu ddiini, olw'okuba amadiini gajja buzzi, naye nga gaagenda okujja gaatusanga tuli Baganda, era bwe tutaave mu kulowooza nti gundi Mukatoliki oba Musiraamu oba Mukristaayo, abalabe baffe bajjanga kutukozesanga bwe bazze bakola okuviira ddala ku Obote okutuuka ku Museveni eyeeyita nti takkiriza mu ddiini yonna, naye nga Abaganda abamu bagamba nti atufuge kasita wa ddiini yaffe. Amadiini gasaanidde okusigalanga mu mizikiti, mu makereziya ne mu makanisa, nga bwe tuvaayo tuba bazzukulu ba kintu. Ekyokuna, tusaanye okweddamu okwekuba mu kifuba ne tulumirwa eggwanga lyaffe n'okufiiririza, kubanga abaana baffe ne bazzukulu baffe bagenda kutwevuma lwaki twazaalwa. Ekyokutaano, tusaana okudda ku mpisa z'abajjajjaffe ez'okulumirwa bannaffe, okusingira ddala singa Muganda munnaffe aba attiddwa, okuyimirira ku magulu gaffe ne tuwolereza eggwanga, ne tuwolera eggwanga. Kino kyokka ekisobola okulaga abazze batemula Baganda bannaffe emyaka egisusse mu 30 nga nti naffe tetukyazanya, tutegeere kiki ekyokukola. Kakati ebyo bye bintu ebitaano Mwami Kasozi byayagala tukole. I think bye tuteekwa okukola okugolola ensobi zaffe. Kati mu ebyo by'ensobi siwuliddeemu kugamba nti ettaka libeere mu bika oba libeerewa. Siwuliddeemu kigamba nti wabeerewo amagye agaduumirwa gundi oba agataduumirwa gundi. Siwuliddeemu kigamba nti ate kati ogeya namunye nga gundi simanyi ogeya ennyonyi nga namunye ali ku nju. Conspiracy theory sigiwulidde nti abazungu be batutawaanya, be baleeta bino byonna. Twandibadde bulungi nnyo, naye abazungu abo Abangereza be bakuma ebikooni ne tuvumbeera ne tutandika okujja. Kakati kansembyeyo kino naddala kyasimba kesera eddiini erina okwegenderezebwa ennyo mu Buganda, kubanga yali ddiini eyayawula Muteesa owookubiri ku Beni Kiwanuka n'agenda n'Obote mbu kuba yali mukristaayo munne. Yali ddiini eyatwala Yusufu Lule e Tanzania n'akolagana n'Obote mu 1978 okulwanyisa Amini. Akabagwa omwaka gwandibadde 1979. Yali ddiini eyayawukanya Lule ne Kayiira. Lule n'awagira Museveni mu 1982. Yali ddiini eyagaana Paulo Muwanga okukolagana ne Ssemwogerere mu 1980 mu kukuba akalulu era n'awagira Obote mbu mukristaayo munne. Yali ddiini eyawagiza Dr. Kiseka ne Njuba Museveni ne balekawo Kayiira mbu kuba baali bakatoliki. Kyannaku nnyo nti Abaganda mu ddiini tetutegeeza bukyayi, naddala wakati w'Abakristaayo n'Abakatoliki. Omuganda omu olusanga omulala nga si wa ddiini ye oba ey'Ekikatoliki oba ey'Ekikristaayo, olwo taddayo kutunuulira bulungi biri mu muntu oyo na busobozi bwe, amuteekako bukyayi. Bwe tuba nti tuli bakulwanyisa abalabe baffe n'okubawangula, enkola eno tusaanye tugikomye, tuwagire munnaffe okusinziira ku kirungi ky'alina n'obusobozi bwe. Akati ndowooza ebyo bizingazingako bulungi nnyo bye mbadde njogerako, bivudde mu Mr. Kasozi's book. Abaganda tuteekwa okugolola ensobi zaffe. Well, that was well and good. The only problem, as I said, Kasozi's theory has three major components. One is the conspiracy theory. So, where are the British? Where are the colonialists here who are supposed to be causing all these conflicts between these people, are they instigating us to fight each other or even impoverishing us? The Kasozi's theory is that actually we, the Africans, we are victims of the former colonial rulers, because they have a conspiracy. They determine what kind of leaders we are going to have, and for them, the more chaos we have in Africa, the happier the former colonial rulers are. I don't know about that, but that's the conspiracy theory. The army, the second component of Kasozi's solution, has not seemed to be very important. Instead, the dini has been the problem, which means discrimination, which I've talked about. When you eliminate discrimination, then you don't have to worry about what religion a person is, what denomination within the same religion the person is. Even Islam has, factions, and you can't just say, "Oh, those are Muslims." Well, there are many. There are the different types of Islam too. So, deen is a very broad way of characterizing our problem, but it does not really explain the causes of our conflict. And the army now, will the existence of a Muganda army, the reason why I wanted to make this presentation today was because Kasozi asked me a question. He said, "Hey, Mubilu Musoke, olowooza kibi Uganda bwe Buganda bwefuna eggye lyayo?" Now, of course, he asked that question knowing very well that if I say, "Oh no, Uganda should not have its army," and then he said, "Oh, see, I got you." If I say, "Well, yeah, it's good, it should have a minute," well, then I'm not thinking about the causes of the conflicts. What is causing our problems? Karl Marx had an explanation which history has proven invalid. Max Weber had an explanation in culture which is increasingly becoming irrelevant to the solution of modern problems. Durkheim thought it was division of labor. And the more you divide labor, you don't have to do anything else. Just by the economy growing and becoming more sophisticated, all the problems society faces will be resolved. And of course, there was Jean-Jacques, who wrote the contract theory. For him, a solution that comes closer to Kasozi's, the constitutions, as in social contracts, are not necessarily solutions. We had a 1995 constitution, and people were told that even ordinary people without shoes in the villages contributed ideas to this 1995 constitution. Fraud. The war problem is, what was the politics? The constitution, 1995 constitution was fraud. Britain has no constitution, but they have democracy. The reason is principles are more important. A principle that leadership should be based on the consent of the people. That is far more important than drafting a 150-page constitution. And if you don't respect these principles, you are not going to solve anything. So it doesn't matter what it is, whether you are talking about the conspiracies that our problems are not, in fact, our problems, but caused by the colonialists, or, the reason why we have a problem with the Museveni's Uganda don't have an army, or even worse, that land ownership should be invested in the hands of the clans. I don't see those as real solutions. As long as you do not have justice, you do not have democracy, you will solve nothing. Democracy is the most important element in any society and in solving our problems. So, protect the freedom and make sure that people express themselves, freely vote and for their leaders, freely determine who is going to lead them, and you have solved the problem. In any case, social, political, economic problems have no final solution. They change as society changes. So let us not deceive ourselves. that there is a magic wand that will be waved in the air, and then all the problems will disappear. So, I thank you for listening to this edition of Democratization of Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective. In this particular case, we have been comparing Mr. Kasozi's theories to our solutions. Thank you for listening, and I expect that you will tune in next week where a totally new topic will be discussed. Thank you for listening.